GM. The animals in the farm are awake. Businesses are done.
Yay! GM everyone, GM Z, GM Josh, welcome
GM,
and
GM.
All right, Josh. We missed you last week. I heard you were working extra hard in the farm, and you heard
Oh
you had a
man.
little minor mishap. What happened?
Yes, I heard the cocks crow. I heard the cows moo. I heard Yosi finish his morning dump, and I had to come in today after a really terrible injury to my ankle last week, which I've been limping around, and somehow or rather made it to see K Trinada this weekend, which was fucking amazing. But
Oh
great to be
man,
back.
oh
Great to
man.
be back. Great to be back. Thank you so much for having me again, Yosi and Sadar. It's always great to be back.
I'd love to have you as always. It's like a triple shot of espresso whenever we talk to you.
Triple shot. I get you. I get you jittery and on the verge of depression.
Or of greatness. But no,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
we miss you. Obviously, hopefully you're fully recovered. Word
Yeah.
on the street is it was a word on the street that it was a pretty epic fight you had on Cambridge campus.
Yes.
It was you drop kick someone. Is that what happened to your ankle?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
what's the official story there?
Yeah. So the official story was that both Cambridge and Oxford actually sent one representative each to a final duel to settle the rival once and for all, like to settle our almost 800-year-old rivalry. And so they sent me, and they also sent this other Asian dude from Oxford, and we basically battled it out for like 30 minutes. And I did win because I mean fuck Oxford, right? But I did come out with a bit of a scrape on my ankle.
You know what? Let's print that, and for all future prosperity,
Mhm.
So in 30 years when you're running for the prime minister of become the next prime minister of Singapore, you can tell that story.
Inshallah.
Don't mess it with
Inshallah.
Josh.
Inshallah.
You, all right, Sardar. Do you want to do a brief intro and then we can get right into it for this week?
yeah, hi everyone, welcome. This is Serdar speaking, your sufficient degen head of marketing at Timeless.
All right, let's go. Sardar is the guy who makes everything run on time.
Yes, sir.
I'm Z. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Timeless, and trying to wash away all my past sins of working at big tech. So, Josh, you're up next.
I'm Joshua. I am a young lad who just won the Oxford Cambridge battle. That's going to be part of my LinkedIn profile now because I'm hoping to get a lot of clout from that. But yes, joined by Command Z and Sadar, who are amazing mentors to me, and here to have a conversation with them about social capital today, huh, Z?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Every day, every moment, we're thinking about social capital. But this week, we're gonna go into your home turf, especially about like just kind of really thinking about status, right? Because I think the concept of social capital is, I think, it's fairly well
Mm,
understood, right? I mean, all of us have some unit of it, right? Some of us are born with, let's say you're born into a certain type of family, you may have certain level of social capital.
yeah,
They're built into your kind of your almost like your family lineage. And some people, but for the most part, you work hard through your life. Being a good person, work hard, work smart. You kind of just earn and accrue a certain level of social
yeah,
capital. And the goal there is basically that's a fuel for, kind of earning the status among your peers, right? And also society at large. And I think this is something that Josh, I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit, right?
mm,
Because you actually, at a tender age of in your early 20s, have some, pretty notable, status among your peer.
I,
You serve in the
yeah.
military, right? You've been, legend has it, you've been kicking some serious ass on the street. That's why you broke your ankle,
Yeah,
right?
that's the word on the street
And
though.
then,
That's the word on the street.
hey, that's the only record that
Street
matters.
cred, for sure.
Um, and then I think that what's really important is really kind of just asking, like, and I'll kind of probe this way, right? Um, Especially, among the younger generation, like there's this kind of a terminology that basically, like, how do you actually earn the kind of be kind of respectable in your own culture, right? Build your own personal brand, right? I think that's
Yeah.
becoming more
Yeah.
and more important, right? And
Yeah.
and I'll kind of start with because in our show note, I actually looked it up. There's a word called snob, SNOB, and I didn't realize it
Yes.
has a direct connection to Cambridge. I'm not
Oh,
sure.
really?
Do you want to give a readout?
The
Well,
word snob. You
it's
tell me.
actually
You tell
a
me.
Latin word. Sen, okay, I'll just have a little history lesson for people who are listening, and
Yes, sir.
as we go deeper into the conversation, we'll become more degenerate. Um, but the word snob, SNOB, which is a kind of a Western phrase, is a short for a Latin phrase, sin nobilite, which just means
Mm.
without nobility.
Mm.
Okay, and I'll give you a little history. It started in the 1820s, so it has a way long history of it. It started in the colleges like Oxford and Cambridge, where when new students, when they matriculate, when they go to the first year when they go to the school,
Yeah.
they actually would sign behind their name as sign nobility. That means without nobility. That's how they differentiate
Yeah.
themselves, right? Versus the kind of the monarchs or the noble
Yeah.
houses. And then it got shorthanded into SNOB,
That is so interesting.
snob.
That is so interesting because how the matriculation in Cambridge works or in Oxford works as well is the first day that all the new undergraduates or masters or PhD students arrive, there is each college. So in Cambridge, there's 31 colleges. Each of the colleges hold their own matriculation ceremony. So matriculation is the process, of course, where you're registered into the system, right? And everyone holds a pen and a book. You're presented with this giant book owned by the college, and you write your name in there on the date you were matriculated, and you sign off. And I'm assuming in the past, those guys were made to write snob behind them. Yeah, that's kind of terrible, man. That's kind of terrible.
But that's the ironic part.
Yeah.
The original the kind of that shorthand was actually a sign of kind of almost like giving a middle finger to the nobility, right? Meaning like, hey, we work
Yeah.
hard to get
So
to
we're
where
not
we
we're not
are.
no, we're
right?
not
Oxford and
we don't have a
Cambridge.
rich. I mean, we don't have that background or the nepotism to get us to where we are, but we still did it anyway.
That's exactly it. And I think this is kind of where I'm trying to go a little bit deeper and pick your brain a little bit, right? The original concept is actually being counterculture, or basically, hey, we work hard. We're the kind of proletariat class, right? We work hard to earn our status, and then obviously ironically, or maybe not ironically, the word snob actually flip it its head. It's actually the inversion of this word, right? When people call you're a snob, that's actually no longer preserving the original meaning, right? So let me ask you this, Josh, right? And I think for people who are listening, right, I think this is I enjoy our weekly kind of conversation because I think you give us a unique perspective, especially for the younger generation, but also someone who's actually really on the up and up, right, in terms of upward mobility, right? I mean, you do well in school, right? You know how to pick a fight on the street, and then on top of that, right? I think being at one of probably the top 10 universities, not just in the UK but also around the world, right? Can you just kind of walk us through, right? Like, what was like the first, the moment you got notified that hey, you got accepted to Cambridge, and then what was the first month, 6 month, and year like? How does status and culture play into your own experience? Just would love to kind of hear from.
I see what you're trying to pick from my brain, man, and yeah, this is definitely like it's still so vivid in my brain to this day because so the day I remember it was a Tuesday, right? And it was in January. It was on a Tuesday, and I remember it was a Tuesday because at that point I was leading a platoon in the army, so I was a lieutenant in a tank regiment in Singapore, and I had taken the day off because I knew that very night I would be getting my results back, and so I took a long ride home from camp base, got back home, and I knew the results were going to come up from like 2 a.m. Singapore time to like 6 a.m. in the morning, right? So there's a 4-hour window I was going to get it. And I had actually submitted my application just 2 months before, and I'd written it in 1 week because that was all the time the army was willing to give me after I'd commissioned to take a break to write my own applications. And I was like dead certain I'm going to get it right. I'd gone through the interview. Swear to God, I was like watching my Apple Watch while I was doing the interview, and my heart rate was at like 140 because I was just so nervous, And when the results were going to come out, I actually took a TikTok video of it and recorded the whole experience and reaction from my mom and my sis who came into my room. And my mom and my sis were just so happy to see, like, that I gotten in. And I mean, not to be too deep about this, but it was a really, really important moment for us because my dad had actually just passed away about 3 months before that, and I mean, my mom was just like so happy to see that things had that that there was something good that came out of everything that seemed a bit uncertain at that point in time. And yeah, I mean, when you're talking about like social capital and status, right? Like, what exactly is social capital? I think the way I see it is that it's an expertise and trust that people have in a person based off of the sort of like relationships and network that they've created, right? You've built a credibility, you've built a reputation, you've built an influence, you've built some sort of grounding to you as an individual that makes you stand out to other people. And this could come in the form of an academic achievement, like, I mean, like, if I'm being very honest, getting in Cambridge was a door open, but I feel like going into the university itself is where the true social capital unlock really was. It was all these micro connections that I was getting myself into, like even how we started speaking on spaces with Z and with Sadar, being in ECC Brussels. It's through all these relationships that have been built over a prolonged period of time that really accrue social capital.
Love this story, and I think this is kind of why I enjoy the weekly discussion because at Timeless, we obviously internally, our internal team meetings, if I'm talking to my co-founders and Serdar, like usually it's pretty contentious, and Serdar was without giving too much airing out too many internal laundries, right? It's pretty heated debates, right? In terms of like what is social capital, how do we actually take a very philosophical abstract concept, right? And how do you write that into 40,000 lines of code, or how do you translate that into pixel?
Yeah.
And then Serdar, obviously, he needs to basically, hey, kind of repackage some of these ideas and these software applications into something that is actually presentable to the larger world, right? Because in reality, for the most part, and then I think the point I'm trying to make is that in today's society, you get less than, if you're lucky, you get 60 seconds to make an impression, right? If you're not lucky, you have less than 10, 15 seconds. And I think this is where status comes in, right? Historically, if you come from a noble family, right, you get a title, right? You're, Sir,
Lord,
Paul McCartney, Lord, right? Exactly.
Baron,
right?
Baroness,
and
Baron, Baroness. You've got all these weird fucking names
Duchess.
coming up. And every American's trying to marry
right?
and steal those names. Yeah, see?
there you go. You go. But in the past, I would say, make a strong argument since the kind of the age of enlightenment, the Renaissance, we have different ways to actually kind of stratify different status and different culture, right? And a lot of it has to do with your education, right? So obviously Cambridge and, Oxford in the UK, right? And then in the US, even as like most Americans, we like to think we're fairly driven by kind of a mere merits. But in reality, it's like, there is still that kind of idea, right? And I'll reciprocate, kind of my own observation, right? Which is, back in 2005, when I was interviewing at Google, like you would think, hey, Google, and especially in the early days, there's no status, right? It's basically on your merit. But I can tell you, I kid you not, at the time when I joined, I think we had less than 5,000 employees. I would say probably 60% of it were, most of them were Ivy League educated, right? It was mostly Stanford.
Target schools, yeah?
Don't get me wrong. Target schools, right? That's exactly it, right? And, and then it was basically, by proxy, Carnegie Mellon, right? Harvard, right? MIT. So it wasn't like, that's not to say, these are bad schools. I mean, those are earned, right? But the reality is this, right? And this the point, and I think this is really kind of one of my first, kind of observation, which is status gets you into the door, right? It really does open the door for you, but you still have to kind of work to continue to earn that credit. And then, probably one of the most famous, most well-respected software engineer at Google for the past 15 years, this guy by the name of Jeff Dean. And for people who are listening, if you just Google him, right? Jeff Dean. He's probably he is the Michael Jordan of software engineering. Literally, I kid you not, 2006, I was looking at our internal code base at Google. he single-handedly was accounting for roughly around 30% of the software code,
Wow.
right? So and crazy part is this, right? He didn't go to any of the Ivy League school, right? And he's just kind of just, but
Yeah.
he was able to kind of prove his worth, right? And after almost 20 years, he's a legend. I mean, literally within the company, there are hundreds of engineers who've written software
Yeah.
applications to generate meme based on Jeff Dean, right? And so and then the New York Magazine, New
He's
Yorker,
like
right? They all
he's
have
like a
done like,
legend in Google. Yeah, I
yeah,
see this article by the New Yorker in 2018 going, the friendship that made Google huge. At Google, Jeff is far better known, and they compared him to Chuck Norris, bro. Wow, he's a legend there, huh?
literally, he's a legend. Literally, like their
Yeah.
memes are every day within the company. You know, the engineers will write memes about him. You know, like for example, when Jeff Dean wakes up in the morning and he looks at himself in the mirror actually says LGTM. LGTM, for people who are listening, LGTM is actually a software approval code at Google, or a lot of, actually, it's not just Google now, right? Apple, and most companies, when you do code review and your managers give you approval, say, hey, this software code looks good, you know, it passes unit test. You don't say okay, you don't say good, it says
LGT.
LGTM, looks good to
Yeah.
me, right. And then the joke is that, you know, that whenever, you know, even the mirror, the reflection of reality, when they see him,
Yeah.
they give him LGTM, right?
Yeah.
So that's the legend. So, but the point is, like, you know, he come from a relatively humble, you know, educational background, but he works hard and he's obviously smart and he earned his way up, right? Now he's a legend.
Yeah.
Literally every single, you know, software engineer knows this guy by heart,
Yeah.
right? So that's kind of one example, right? Another thing I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit, right? And I'll probe this way, right? Do you know this guy named Jordan Peterson?
I do know.
Just out of
I do know
curiosity.
Jordan Peterson. He came to Cambridge like 2 years ago for just a really long debate on like masculinity and the role of men. He's a psychologist, yeah?
And then he's a psychologist. He's probably for maybe for audience who are listening, I'm assuming that, you know, probably maybe 50% of the audience on today, we have, you know, close to 400 people now, probably heard of him, right? He's kind of like in the past 7+ years, there is a kind of this a group of people that center around Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, Eric Weinstein, Sam Harris, and there's, you know, 5 or 6 other people. They call him the dark intellectual web, right? So he's in so many ways, you know, I think he's picking certain topics and certain ideas to really rejuvenate this public debate. Like, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a female? And what does it mean to have certain, you know, kind of political leaning? You know, the idea of religion.
Yeah.
He's actually, you know, being a psychology trained scientist. Surprisingly, for the past, you know, 3.5 years, he's been very religious about his kind of like, you know, preaching to the general public, right? Like, just because in pursuit of truth, in pursuit of science, we don't have to abandon religion, because religion has a lot of connotation in status and culture and social capital, right? So, so my kind of a question to you, Josh, is this, right? Do you think, you know, like, how would you, because you have some religious background, I'm not sure you're comfortable disclosing.
Absolutely, I am.
Would love to know if you are. Would love to know, would love to know how you think about, you know, like, what role does religion play in your kind of a general status within your community and also among your peers, right?
I mean, that's such a great way to kind of like, I think the one problem that I guess religion has is this whole institutional aspect to it, right? You almost at some points you do lose a sense of individual relationship in I guess organized religion, because there are hierarchies and there are social classes and statuses between priests, bishops, your nuns, and then you come to the, you know, the ordinary person in the church who's raising his hands and praying to God, right? I mean, I like earlier when you were talking about social capital and you were talking about how, you know, all these aristocrats had all these names that people really looked up to them. In today's day and age, you can almost compare that to, you know, there's varying ways in which you can build your credibility. And I was just thinking about this story that a friend told me, because I have a friend who knows this guy who's a Spanish aristocrat, right? And in the Spanish aristocracy, the whole thing is sort of being scrapped already, but he still holds this, like, I guess like a baron position, and they don't get any benefits for being a baron, right? You don't get extra housing, you don't get extra land, you don't get extra anything, right? The name is literally just for namesake. But purely because of his name as Baron, he's invited to a lot of high profile events where they just want him there simply because he's a Baron, and they want to be able to flex that they've got, barons and baronesses in their presence, aristocracy in their presence. So there's so much of these relationships that have been built through social capital. They continue living on in this day and age simply because of perception and how people have gained a sense of trust and credibility to these words that are associated with aristocracy, associated with being a part of a noble class. And like I want to hear from you, right, Z? Do you, like, when it comes to religion, and like I don't know if you're a religious person, would love to hear from you. Do you think that what do you think of social capital and religion? Do you think these are two things that can come hand in hand?
Yeah, and I think this is kind of where I'll be quite honest. Like I have this huge question mark, right? Because historically, to get a little context, right? Like coming from an Asian background, obviously, religion has a very different role. I think religion is usually intermingled with culture. As actually, and I think this is even true in a Western society, right? Which is like whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or kind of a Judeo, kind of a Jewish faith. I think it is part of the culture, right? And I think that kind of gave you certain level of there is certain level of social cachet or status that's actually bestowed upon you based on your religious belief, right?
Yeah.
But obviously, as society has become more and more secular, I think is very. I think that the perception has changed a little bit, to say the least. I'm being purposely being kind of under dramatic in this way, right? Because 100 years ago, I think of any person worthwhile of any kind of social respect or societal status, you have to be religious, right? I mean, the Church of England was actually founded predicated on this idea, right? But obviously, since the age of the kind of the scientific discovery and as society become more and more secular and less religious, right? I think you can make a strong argument, Josh, that, and there's a point I'm trying to make, which is, I think in the past 40, 50 years is actually, in polite society, you don't want to talk about religion, right? Because we're kind of almost, there is this kind of a cultural connotation where, it's in conflict. If you're religious, that means you're not enlightened. You're not well educated. And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think I was actually somewhat inspired by you, because I think you wore your heart on a sleeve and you wear your faith on your sleeves, right? Meaning we talked about this, right? 3 weeks ago, is that I think the best version of you is the most honest and most authentic version of yourself, right? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think someone like Jordan Peterson, again, for people who are listening, you don't have to agree with everything he says, right? There's a lot of kind of controversial stuff that he talks about. But I think he does bring a point, which is like, I think we need in order for younger people to really have a standing, they need to discover a version of themselves that might be potentially anchored on religion, right? And I think you were very inspiring. Actually, I was actually inspired 2 months ago when we were talking in person. You said, hey, your dad was a former was a preacher, right? And while you may not be a man of cloth, you do believe in, you do have your faith and deep down within you, right?
And I think the one really interesting thing for me is that, like, for example, like when in the church community, and like, when you tell other people that, hey, your dad is someone who, leads a congregation, there's always a huge sense of respect for people who are in service. And that service and that level of, I guess, compassion and giving to the community is what gains you social capital, which can be so different from what the world shows. Like in the world, I was literally watching this series for the past 3 days while doing my work. It's called Gangs of London, and the whole story is about this boy who tries to become his dad, his dad was like the biggest drug kingpin in the whole of London. And the whole time he was just trying to gain social capital by killing and destroying everything around him. And so sometimes as a religious person, there can be a disconnect with a lot of narratives that are being put out into this world on how you can attain success or social capital, for that matter.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of where I think, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think, like we, in the past when we talk about social capital, it's always coming from a perspective like, like some professional, kind of professions you take, right? Like, for the most part in Western society, lawyers, doctors, right, or athletes and celebrities, I think that's how we typically ascribe to this idea
Mm,
of having high status, right? But I'm saying like just being a good, honest, good person, right?
yeah.
And having a good sense of where you want to go in life, right? You could be guided by principle of like just science, or it could be guided by your deep faith in the higher being. I think those are all viable
Mm,
alternatives. And the reason why I'm sharing this with our audience is that we talk about this, right? And I don't want to project this image that the only way you can earn status is by being wealthy or being
mm,
famous, right? That's not that could be that could not be further from the
yeah.
truth, right? Like the beginning of opening kind of our monologue and soliloquy is that status, every one of us are born with some unit of it,
Mm,
right? And for the most part, status is actually earned,
yeah.
right? It's not
Yeah.
given, right? And the reason I'm bringing up religions is a perfect example, right? If you're faithful to your religion, then that's something you practice every single moment when you're alive,
Mm,
right? So every day you earn
yeah.
it. There's no such thing that you're preordained to be a religious or faithful
But what
person,
what what do
right?
you think about, okay, like a huge hotly debated topic amongst final year Cambridge students or final year students in general is that, a lot of really high paying jobs tend to be dominated by nepotism or dominated by, hey, my dad works as MD in this financial center and therefore I'm getting this job. Do you think then that, like, it seems quite it seems to me that, hey, status can actually be passed on through blood. Like it may not be through your son getting a name Lord something, but it could come in other shapes or form.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a very profound question. And by the way, for people who are listening, this is why Josh, he got accepted to Cambridge. I think you have a way to really cut through the noise, and I think that's actually a really good question. And I don't have all the answers, but the way I look at it is this,
Mm,
right? The rational side, the kind of the part of me that was always optimistic and idealistic, um, is that everyone should get to the starting line at the same time,
mm,
right? And it should be 100% earned,
yeah,
right? And 0% given, right? Um, and I think that's kind of what I aspire for myself. Was like, okay, like nothing's ever given to
yeah,
you. You have to work hard and work
yeah,
smart, right? Um, but the reality is this, right? And I think this is actually something that I always talked about, right? Now that I'm a new dad, 3 years into this
mm,
journey, I always want to put on this lens. Do I want to give certain unfair
yeah,
advantage to my baby girl,
yeah.
right? And Josh, you're too young maybe in this journey,
No,
but I think you know where I'm
yeah,
going with this, right?
would
Right?
you want to give an unfair advantage to your baby girl? Do you think that's something that um is maybe a bit contentious for you? And could you talk a bit more about that contention?
Yeah, I think it's biological, and that's the way I kind of want to explain this, right? Like rational side of me, the way that I just explained it, which is that of course, you want society to be fair and completely open and
Yeah,
transparent, right? But you want to put a kind of a primal level, right? As an individual, as a dad,
yeah,
or just as a kind of a good
yeah.
person, right? You want to give an unfair advantage for a simple reason, right? One, like it's genetically ingrained in us,
Mm,
right? There's a reason why we have natural
mm-hmm.
selection, right? People who are tall and strong and smart and faster, their offspring tend to have a stronger chance of
Yeah,
survival. And I think this is deeply encoded in
yeah, yeah.
evolution, right? And I think the second part, which is this, right? I think there is a, whether, the selfish gene, right? Richard Dawkins talked about this as well, right? Like evolution, society, all of this stuff is actually ingrained in this idea that, self-preservation is the best motivation,
Mm,
right?
mm,
So that's why it's
yeah,
conflicted, right? And that's why,
yeah,
for example, whenever I see someone, let's say, and I think you probably are going through this, right? Like, and this is also true, among the well-educated elites in the U.S., right? Like people get kind of like, you get preferential treatment,
mm,
right? And by the way, this not for people, again, for people who are listening, I want to be very intelligent on this conversation. That's not to say, like, for example, if you're a total idiot and you show up at Goldman Sachs or you show up at, Apple, you immediately get a, special, kind of a promoted elevated
yeah,
position. That's not how it
yeah,
works. How you really work is this, right? And I think this is kind of and we're going to circle around to a larger point, which is those people, they usually start at a kind of the early stage. For example, the example I always give is that, Elon Musk actually takes one of his kids to his board meetings at SpaceX and Tesla,
yeah,
right?
yeah. What
Um,
great, like
even
what a
the most hated.
great way. Like I wish I was okay, I mean, I don't know if that kid wants to do that, but how cool would that be? You know, you be growing up speaking to like of course there will be so much pressure on the kid as well when they do grow up, but just that experience alone and having access to be entering into that room in that capacity, like that seems a bit like, you know, that is an unfair advantage that his kid is getting, you know, and you could see it from that way.
Yeah, and just gonna really to get this point across, right? For people who are listening, like there's no animus, there's no secret little cabal or like kind of like secret forces. Actually, it's just these are the unfair advantage what social status gives you, right? These kids, these offspring, they get early access. Another famous example, LeBron James' son, right? By all account, you know, it's nepotism. So it's not just on the intellectual level; it's even at the athletic level. I mean, he stands at 6'3", so clearly he's genetically, I think, you know, he's better off than 90, let's say 8% of the population, but he's not in the 99 percentile. He's not his dad. He's not 6'9", you know, built like a train, right? 6'3", relatively small for an NBA guard. But, and by all account, he, you know, but he, ever since he was a little kid, he had access to the highest echelon of professional performance, right? Personal trainers. So that's another form of nepotism.
Literally his basketball mentor is one of the greatest players to exist. How much more can you ask from that?
Exactly. Right. And so I'll give you another 2 or 3 examples. Just again, I really want to drive this point home, which is Bill Gates. For people who are listening, you may not be familiar with this story, but Bill Gates, obviously he's a smart kid, you know, went to Harvard, right? But how he landed the famous 1980s business contract with IBM was because his mom, Bill Gates' mom, Bill Gates' dad was actually a powerful lawyer. You know, kind of upper middle class. I wouldn't say like the wealthiest person in the US, but upper middle class, powerful lawyer. But his mom does a lot of volunteer work and on the board of a director with a nonprofit organization, was the CEO of IBM. So at a young age of 20, Bill Gates was actually able to directly talk to the CEO of IBM and get the licensing contract with IBM to sell Microsoft Windows. So that's another great example, right? It wasn't like, oh, like, you know, he got some preferential treatment. He still had to walk through the door, right? But that door was open, right? In a very kind of a non-ceremonious way. It just, hey, mom knows the CEO, right? And so there are examples, more and more examples of that. But what does that mean for people who are like us, right? You know, we neither come for wealth nor fame, right? Then what do you do, right? And I think this is kind of where the larger point I'm trying to get to is this, right? Whether you believe in Web3 or crypto or blockchain or technology as a whole, right? Which is, there is something in the air in the sense that we are finding a new way to help younger generation to earn their status. And I think, Josh, I think this is kind of where you're still kind of the, you know, I think you're kind of in the it's kind of the interesting intersection of like, you're still part of the old guard in the sense that, you know, well educated, right? Went to one of the best universities, right? But the question is now, and do you see that, you know, maybe will this situation change in the next 50 years? Is kind of the elite education the only way, right? Is getting paid a 7-figure salary the only way to make a decent living and to earn status in society? And I think the answer, and I'll just kind of purposely bias your answer a little bit, which is, you know, obviously biology has been talking about the network state, which is this idea that you can actually earn your stripes without being directly affiliated with any traditional companies or government, right? And then I think crypto is the same way, right? You can actually make a mark for yourself and increase your financial standing by just actually pioneering something that's completely different and radically different than what was given to us by prior generations, right? So I think that's kind of where I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit, right? What would you tell the next version of Josh? Because for people who are listening, right, some of them may be younger than you. What would you tell them? What advice would you tell them for the next 10, 20, 30 years?
And I'm going to tell you my raw, honest answer, and I want to hear like whether you think this is a good mentality, whether this is a good mentality to have, right? I think it was sometime around like 2-3 years ago when, okay, honestly for me, like this is like this again is a little bit personal to me. I'm just sharing this openly because we keep it real on this channel. And like, I remember there was this one day I was walking into the Solana office and I was, you know, looking to close a deal with Solana, looking to get Solana on board with the Cambridge University and running a few events. And I was just kind of nervous, man. It was Somerset House in London, and I was literally walking in, and I saw this dad and his son walk out of the same venue. And I was like, damn, bro, I wish like there was someone here to literally like hold my hand, walk me in the conference room, and we can get the deal in the bag immediately just because of nepotism. And I remember thinking to myself that afternoon, I was like, hey, you know what? Maybe like it's time for me to change my perception, right? You know what? I don't actually need anyone with me in that room. I don't need anyone's extra help. In fact, I'm going through this process where I'm shaping myself through failure. And it's a very difficult thing to process, right? Because it's not rational. Who wants to go through suffering? Who wants to go through another layer who wants to go through another layer of discussions to get to the final objective? Everyone, all of us want things now, 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 now. And I think one day I just got tired of complaining, I just got tired of saying like, hey, where is my nepotism, or where is my privilege? And I think that for me was kind of was quite cathartic for me, because it really enabled me to truly understand where my own real value lies, instead of instead of where someone else's value, like it could have been my dad who brought me into the office and got me the deal, but here he wasn't there, and it was all to do with my own capability and my own effort. And that's something that I can say through and through without any shame, which is something that sometimes you don't even hear students in Cambridge, like, when you ask them like, hey, which school do you go to before this? And they're kind of shy about it, because they know if they say they went to a top boarding school, it would be like, of course you made it to Cambridge, right? Like, you've been basically trained since day one with all these best resources to get to where you're meant to be.
Yeah, and I think this again, with our audience in mind, I think there's something that it's not going to go away, right? I think it will just evolve into something different in terms of how you earn your status in society, right?
For sure. It will not change.
I'll just kind of, it will not change,
Yeah.
right? So there will be a new form, right? So the point of this conversation, I was like, hey, we have transcended humanity, and status and culture will no longer be relevant. What we're saying is basically every generation you're gonna have a different way to actually earn your status,
a different
right?
way of expressing that social capital.
Exactly. 200-300 years ago it was like nobility, right? Are you a kick-ass warrior? Are you a knight, right? Are you a lord, right? And for the past 150 years, basically, are you well educated? Are you in a certain profession, right? And then for the past 50 plus years, I think it is really about your financial income, right?
Yeah.
Your kind of your cultural relevancy actually become more and more important, right? So and I think in the next
honestly, I think in the past 50 years, if say you made the stupidest amount of money amongst all your friends, and if you knew that your job was basically useless, everyone around you will most likely still see you as someone who's capable and credible, or a good businessman, because you're making a lot of money, and even if the job itself is not that great, but you're still bringing the dough. And I think you've exactly nailed it, Z, is that the expression and the way in which social capital, it will still exist in the next 50 years, the next 100 years, but the shape and form in which it expresses itself will begin to change.
And I love that. And I think just kind of a nerd out a little bit, right? I mean, in biology, we have a thing called genotype and phenotype. Genotype is what's encoded. Phenotype is what gets manifested, right? What gets shown. And I think that's kind of exactly what the point both of us are trying to make, right? Which is like, for people who are involved, and I think this is kind of one of the common thread that we're trying to really tease out, which is that in blockchain, in crypto, and Web3, I think there will be a different way for you to manifest your status and your capacity and your capabilities, right? And not just your attitude, but also your aptitude as well, right? In a very different way. And I think one of the kind of the closing thought that hopefully we can go a little bit deeper next time, which is I recently just kind of still going through like a pretty well published a journal on Nature. It's actually one of the most prestigious publication out there. It was a multi-decade study on social capital, and the way they presented this study by these two professors, that does social capital actually have any direct impact on your well-being, meaning your health, right? Your economic kind of a standing, and also your safety. And this is a little shocking, right? In theory, like, social capital should actually make you a better person. The statistical data is actually inconclusive, right? Does it bring a certain level of societal stability? I think the short answer, I would say intuitively, it should, right? Because we come from church and villages and towns, right? Having more social capital, having people more involved within their local communities, should actually give the community a more kind of longer term stability. But again, the data is actually inconclusive. The only thing The only thing that I actually see is statistically significant is that your ability to bridge your financial income with someone of higher standing.
Your ability to
And
bridge
this is
your
the crazy part.
financial income with someone of higher standing.
And this is kind of, again, it's intuitive, but it's really evident. You look at the data. And by the way, this is a multi-decade study.
Yeah.
They study
Interesting.
across, I think it's like 40 big cities in the US, and they kind of see in certain cities, for example, New York, San Francisco, right? Because it's such a big major city and metropolitan areas, it's actually very likely for someone of lower income to be financially connected with someone of higher
Yeah.
income.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, that creates the biggest upward lifts.
Mm.
Meaning, if you know someone rich,
Yeah.
you actually are more likely. I mean, I'm trying to
No,
translate
absolutely.
a very dense.
And there was even a study
Yeah.
done in Cambridge, like literally in Cambridge University, that showed a group of like groups 1 to 5, group 1 being students coming from the lowest tier of like income or like family income in general, all the way till 5, right? And they found that those who scored 4 and 5 were almost 70% more likely than anyone in groups 1 and 2 to become successful in the future. Successful meaning earning at least 150K within the first 3 years of graduation.
Yeah, and I think this is the most shocking part, right? I mean, and we're talking about like people who are earning like, let's say, below minimum wage, or like, let's say $15,000-$20,000 in the
Yeah.
US. And as long as they're connected somehow, either by 1 degree or 2 degrees of separation, in about a decade, is actually one of the biggest predictor whether you're gonna have upper financial trajectory.
I really like that.
Right? And that's why
I really like the word you use, bridge. Can you like talk a bit more about that? Like, how exactly do you think we can bridge this social capital divide then?
And I think this is kind of where I think, and I'll just kind of be direct with it. Within crypto is really just more about, for example, I mean, we obviously know there is different levels with crypto involvement. There are people who are considered OGs, right? People basically they made their stripes back in like, let's say 2011, 2012, meaning they were buying Bitcoins early in those days, right? And those guys actually funded people like Vitalik, right? And I'll just kind of on a tangent, a storytelling, right? Which is a lot of the early Bitcoin miners. I'm talking about people who really made their like 8-figure, 9-figure,
life-changing money.
They're not the most right? Literally, they were printing money themselves, right, for about 4 or 5 years. And I met actually several of them when I was doing the tour in Asia back in 2017. Not the most well educated, I'll be honest, right? They don't have prestigious university background. And the reason why they were attracted to Bitcoin mining back in those days is because these are basically tier 3, tier 4 software engineers or business people. They couldn't cut it at these, big tech companies or, at these major prestigious firms. So they were basically forced to basically carve out a space for themselves.
I think
lesson learned there, don't always just pursue the most obvious path, right? And because it worked out really well for those people.
And like they created their own version of reality, while everyone around them was, like, this is some shit coin that you're buying, it's zero utility. And like now, like I know one OG from Singapore, and she gave up. I'm very close friends with her daughter, and every year during crypto conferences she hosts a really big party in Singapore. And she was telling me about her story, right? She used to be an air stewardess, and every paycheck that she had, she would put into Bitcoin and into other coins as well. And all the while, her family was telling her that, what a stupid thing to do, because, you have literally a daughter to feed, and how can you do that? And now they are extremely successful without question. And it's really that tenacity, it's not given, it's earned. It's being contrarian, it's thinking against the grain, and not always following the most obvious step at the very outset.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of where I'm going to purposely misuse a phrase, bridge to nowhere. In politics, bridge to nowhere is a negative term, meaning you took a lot of public's money and you built a bridge that literally leads to nowhere. That was a term that was used by a lot of the U.S. governors. Basically, they would fund these public projects for $20-30 million, and they would literally build a bridge. If you get across the bridge, it literally is nowhere. But in this context, I'm purposely using it. What you really want to do is bridge to nowhere, in the sense that take the opportunities that's actually afforded to you, get across to a space that's actually completely open, wide open space. A bridge to nowhere, meaning once you get to that space, you can actually build something based on your own idea, based on your own what you're good at, as opposed to constantly fight for the same battle,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So, and I think this is kind of where Josh, you being kind of a Singaporean, the chances you get into the upper echelon of British society is pretty low because you don't have, 5 generations
Yeah.
of nobility in your family in the UK
Yeah.
to really help you push
Yeah.
forward. But you being a man of international background and you have, kind of you're multilingual,
Yeah.
right? You know the East and the West. Build that bridge to somewhere else.
I love that.
Right? So you can actually
I
carve
love
out
that.
your own land.
You've you've absolutely nailed it. I mean, finding the environment that suits you the most. Earlier we were talking about like religion, right? And gaining respect in religion. I would like if I were to gain a lot of social capital in my own in group in this religious organization that I'm part of. The moment I leave that in group, people outside of that social capital might look very different, right? Like me trying to become a prime minister in the UK House of Lords, like that might most likely not be possible. So finding exactly which environment I thrive in the most as my own unique individual, I think is an honest way to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, okay, this is where you would most likely thrive, and this is the environment that would most likely benefit me the most.
Yeah, and I think this is actually one of the kind of a goal hard truth, which is the best way to earn your social status and to gain the highest level of social capital is actually go into the kind of the uncharted brand new territory. And usually it also means going to a territory, it may not be popular, it may be looked down upon, right? And I think this is actually something that, for example, again, just giving some really concrete examples, 100 years ago, being an actor is actually looked down upon. People don't realize this, right? Oh, actors, and yeah, it was always looked down upon. Like in Asian, if you talk to your mom, Josh, she will probably tell you, right? Being actors 100 years ago was not a prestigious profession. It was actually because what we associate is the glamour of Hollywood, but people don't realize 100 years ago is literally you're just a local town, kind of a drama player on stage, right? There's not a lot of fame. Being an athlete is the same thing, right? The modern version of athletes being good at sports, it's also not something that's actually on a high pedestal, right? It wasn't until the past, I would say probably 60 or 70 years, right? True story. Before World War II, most Olympians had to pay for their own tickets to go to the Olympics. There's no sponsorship, right? So Jesse Owen actually had to pay for his own ticket to go to attend the Berlin Olympics right before World War II, right? So those are kind of the things that people don't realize. And then, for example, and the reason I bring this up, being a software engineer, I can tell you this, right? 20 years ago, when I was in middle school and high school, like it's frowned upon because that means you have a dead end. You're not the most popular kid in school, right? You just have to do a math or engineering dorm. But obviously the past 30 years changed quite a lot, right? Because that's Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Elon's of the world showcase, hey, it's completely different, right? And I think this is kind of where I think the being involved in blockchain, crypto, and Web3 right now is frowned upon. I mean, to be quite honest, right? You go into any polite society. I mean, for everyone who's listening, I'm assuming you're remotely interested in crypto and blockchain, right? It's not in polite society. It's not like I can go to Stanford campus and talk to some of my ex professors. They're not looking at like Z, that's amazing, right? Had I told them, hey, I'm still working at Google, you probably get more favorable kind of a reception. But you say, hey, I'm working at crypto, they think it's no different than, hey, that feels shady, right? But that's exactly my point. I want to get into this territory because guess what? I'm not fighting 200,000 other people with computer science background or people with finance background, right? I'm going to a brave new world, a uncharted territory. Right, and I think that's
really inspiring. That's really, really good. Because I mean, even as an individual myself, I battle with that tension as well. Like you said, it's not like when you go into polite society and you say and you say you're in blockchain or in crypto, you might get some interesting stares, especially if you're in Asian society, right, or amongst people who have been burnt before. And I think at the end of the day, it's about staying true to yourself. If this is something that you truly see value in, then keep defending it because it's what you see value in. And of course, like there will be a lot of things when there could even be situations down the line where these people that started doubting you at the very beginning could be the ones asking you for help down the line.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And don't we all gotta learn to grow some thick skin,
For
right?
sure.
And then just be able to kind of really, because if everyone in society already acknowledges you, then you're just one of the
Yeah.
many, right? If everyone's somewhat doubtful, right, then you know what, you might be onto
Yeah.
something, right? If you're not offending anyone, you're not doing anything interesting, right? If you're offending some people,
I
you
love
might
that.
be just upsetting the car, and right, and you're really kind of saying, hey, I'm gonna be
Yeah.
remarkable. Being remarkable just means you're leaving a mark.
Yeah.
It's not to just blend in,
Mm.
right? So I think that's something that we should always kind of go a little bit deeper, and then you know these weekly conversations with Josh is really just kind of for us to basically explain how we're thinking about this and how we're
Yeah.
approaching crypto Web3 in a way that's actually slightly
Yeah.
different, right? Because I think culture and status is so
Yeah.
important with everything we do at our company. And also, we are really hoping to reach out to our community and say, hey, you know what? We're a little bit more methodical, right? We're no different. Like, I want to make all the
Yeah.
riches. I want people, to kind of basically benefit from our work.
Mm.
But at the same time, I think we're thoughtful in the sense that there's so much, life is rich. There's so much more interesting stuff below the surface, beyond just the token prices,
Mm.
right? And Josh, it's yet another amazing conversation, and we should really kind of go deeper and deeper in these conversations, and then at some point maybe we should just turn this into a formal podcast, and we'll do a Joe Rogan style. We'll do a 2-hour
I
session
love that, man.
with actual discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I
Yeah.
think the one thing that, being part of now, like the Timeless community, the Timeless, the Timeless group, and having spent all these hours with you guys now, the one thing that I truly value in these conversations is honestly the transparency, right? You guys always keep it real, and I think for if I were a viewer listening into this conversation, the top thing that I would get is that through the entire methodology, through the entire your how exactly things go on behind the scenes in Timeless, you guys flesh everything out for people to see. No cloth is left unturned, and I think that's something that's really valuable and really special.
And then I'm always mindful. Sherdar is always in the background doing a thankless job, and then I know it's been pretty stressful. As we're trying to get ready for Token 2049 in
Mhm.
Singapore. It's happening literally less than a month
Yeah.
away. Josh, hopefully you're gonna
I'll be there
there.
to shill it for you, man. I'll be your number one ambassador, bro. Trust.
I cannot wait. And then we're obviously going deeper and deeper into the ton blockchain ecosystem. Again, no financial advice, no tip advice, but for people who are still listening, TON, that's the way to go. So it is the age of ton. Last year was all about Solana. I think this year and next year, it will be the age of ton. We're just seeing a lot of good activities across DeFi, SocialFi, within the Telegram ecosystem.
Yeah.
And we're expecting some pretty big announcements during Token 2049 from the Telegram team. Because last year they announced automatic opt-in for all of the Telegram users who have a Ton wallet. I think this year they're going to probably make a similar announcement. And I think the price action will reflect that. So again, not a financial advice. So Gary Gensler,
NFA.
Don't come after us. LFA, that's right. All right, guys. Another great conversation in the can, Josh.
Thank you so much.
Glad you recover. Yeah, love this kind of back and forth with you.
Absolutely. It's such a great time, and we'll see you all next week, yeah?
That's right. All right. Night.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Bye.